Ethics. Ethics deal with what is good or bad. Ethics is how we ought to behave and live our lives. Ethics is a branch of philosophy, or often called as moral philosophy. Ethics goes beyond theory. Everyday life is full of ethical issues even if they remain hidden. Our everyday life decisions have moral dimensions. This means that they have components which extend beyond interest for ourselves and involve a concern for others. Ethical decisions are often made without thinking. The ethical part remains hidden. This may be because the decision is part of a routine or forms part of widely accepted practices. For example, the ethical consequences of what we eat may go unnoticed daily, but what we eat affects others, perhaps the people or animals which produced it. If we do not examine our ethical life, we may not notice our inconsistent decisions and can miss opportunities for making progress. For example, perhaps by eating fewer eggs from cage hens and more free-range eggs, we can help improve the lives of laying hens. There are three branches of ethics. The first one is the professional ethics. Professional ethics refers to the ethics that a person must adhere to in respect of their interactions in their professional life. For example, a doctor may not personally believe that the course of medical treatment chosen by patient is the right one. However, under the code of ethics, the doctor must respect the rights, autonomy, and freedom of choice of the patient. Another example is vets should not cause their patients unnecessary suffering because a veterinarian shall uphold the standards of professionalism, be honest in all professional interactions, and report veterinarians who are deficient in character or competence to the appropriate entities. Are ethics just subjective? Ethical judgments may not be reached in the same way as scientific facts, but there's a large agreement between different ethical theories and even between cultures on what is right and wrong. For example, versions of the Golden Rule, do unto others as you would have done unto yourself, are found in almost all religions and ethical systems. Indeed, ethics as glue holding societies together. Are ethics just preferences? This requires little rational defense and does not attempt to compel others to do the same. It does not matter if anybody else feels the same. However, the sentence, "we ought not to kill healthy animals," does require rational justification and attempts to say what others ought not to do. The practice of moral justification suggests an impartial standpoint. Its justifying reasons must be recognized not just by the person making them, but by persons generally. Self-interested acts are not considered by most moral theorists to be ethical justifications. For example, it would be hard to claim that I euthanized the dog to ensure that my sleep was no longer disturbed. However, certain self-interested acts may be compatible with more broadly based ethical principles and therefore be ethically defensible. For example, I amputated the dog's severely injured leg in order to secure the fee, could be ethically justified by the addition of and to save the dog from further suffering. Ethical dilemmas are situations in which possible course seems to be morally wrong. For example, a vet suspects that a cat-owning client has been cruel to his pet on being presented with a badly injured cat by the owner. If the vet reports the owner to the authorities for breaking the country's animal cruelty law, the vet would be breaking the normal professional rules of client confidentiality. However, if the vet just treats the cat and ignores the fact that the injuries were deliberately inflicted, the vet seems to be letting the client get away with an immoral and illegal act. Careful thinking may identify the most important principle or obligation in that particular situation. It might be decided that considerations for the patient in such extreme circumstances override considerations of client confidentiality. This might be given further support by the consideration that the cat or other cats may be injured by the person again later, or by recent research which demonstrate a correlation between animal abuse and other types of abuse within families. The moral status of animals. Possible positions one may hold on the moral status of animals include animals have no moral status and therefore we have no duties towards them. If this were the case, then the prolonged beating to death of a dog just for fun would not be a problem. Few people think like this, although there may be classes of animals, such as vermin or pests, who are treated as though this were the case. The moral status of animals, possible position 2. Animals have instrumental value. This is sometimes called extrinsic value. This means that their moral status is dependent upon their effect on humans. One version of this would be that the beating to death of a dog described above would be wrong because it deprived its owner of his or her property, or because it would upset the dog's owner. Another version of this view is that such behavior would corrupt the person inflicting the beating and make them more likely to be cruel to humans in the future. Experimental animals are frequently viewed in terms of how useful or instrument they are to humans. The moral status of animals, possible position 3. Animals have intrinsic value. This means that the animal matters for its own sake, never mind its effect on others. This could mean that making the dog suffer without good reason is wrong, whether or not the owner or anyone else was affected. Humans are often said to possess this sort of intrinsic value. For example, don't beat the dog as it would hurt it, and this matters.
Sentience is a word that in essence describes a being that have the capacity to feel, and it is actually thought by many to be the minimum requirement for moral status. Para kasi sa mga ibang philosophers, the capacity to feel even the simplest sensations gaya ng pain or warmth is enough para mabigyan ang animals ng some basic intrinsic value because of the interest which flow from these feelings. These feelings are sometimes called as the mental states, which include the emotions such as happiness or fear, as well as the sensations. By the definition itself, it only means to say that the animals are conscious and aware of those feelings. Alam nila na nakakaramdam sila ng pain, suffering, and they experience positive emotions too. But hindi pa rin natin masasabing ang mga animals ay may self-conscious. Kasi pag sinabing self-conscious, an animal would be able to think about itself and its own emotions and sensations, hindi lang yung basta ma-experience na nila. Mental states may be pleasant or unpleasant. Pleasant, meaning to say giving contentment to the mind or senses. These are the feeling of pleasure and enjoyment. In short, purong saya lang ang nararamdaman. On the other hand, unpleasant, ito yung mga feeling na ayaw natin magkaroon tayo kasi hindi nakakapag-isip ng maayos and such. Ito yung feeling of pain, distress, fear, and anxiety. Puro na lang kalungkutan, tapos pagdurusa or paghirap. Anyway, meron pa din namang ibang mental capacities or aspects which animals may have to some extent. Ito yung kinukonsider ng ibang philosophers to be important in determining the animal's moral value. The first one, the ability to have desires or beliefs. Katulad din natin sila na may mga hinahangad na makuha sa buhay. Example on this is that the chimpanzee desires to continue living. Gusto pa daw niyang mabuhay ng mas matagal or mag-explore pa. Or di kaya naman, the chimpanzee wants to have a banana since baka hindi siya nabibigyan or wala siyang makuhanan. Second, self-awareness. to conceive of oneself over time. Example on this is that the gorilla is aware that she is thinking about a problem. Third, the ability to communicate with others using language. And lastly, the ability to act morally. Alam nila kung ano yung tama at mali sa mga behavior na ipinapakita at ginagawa nila. Diba nga minsan, mas kaya ka pa nilang tulungan kaysa sa tao. Example, so merong anecdotes na nagsasabing yung mga dolphins daw ay may kakayahan o nakaligtas na ng mga nalulunod na swimmers. So, as these capacities become more complex, parang nangyayari ay mas kukunting species naman ang nagkakaroon ng mga ganitong mental capacities. It might be argued that the more complex their capacities, the more complex the needs which flow from them. So we have here 3 evidences for the sentience of animals. The first one is the behavior. By observing the behaviors of non-human animals, it can provide us some evidence for or against sentience, because there are important connections between mental life and behavior. Such evidence may be collected in the controlled but unnatural laboratory setting or in the less controlled but more natural field setting. The second evidence is the evolution. Sinasabi dito na kung tayong mga tao at ang mga hayop ay nag-share ng common ancestors, so pwede nga talagang masabing that animals' basic emotions are similar to ours. Maliban na lang talaga kung they arose late in evolution. Humans and animals are thought to differ only in degree, not in kind, in these abilities. Meaning to say, siguro same lang ng uri ng abilities but mas lamang lang tayo. For example, the way we talk. Yes, animals can talk, but halos sounds lang ang naririnig. While tayo is kaya nating magbuo ng words to communicate with others. Furthermore, if an animal's ability to feel a certain way provides an adaptive advantage, this provides proof for its existence. While in the case of pain, we know that the human ability to experience pain has adaptive value. Those that cannot, such as sufferers of some forms of leprosy, require medical attention in order to survive. It is likely that the natural selection has preserved this crucial adaptation in many species. Kaya siguro hanggang sa ngayon is parang ganun pa din or same lang sa nararamdaman ng mga ancestors natin na pain. Minsan mas malala pa or pwede din namang mild lang, ganun. Yun.
Physiology and anatomy. Similarities with humans, especially neurophysiology and neuroanatomy. It is thought likely that mental states in humans are closely related to brain structure and activity. The existence of very similar neurological structures in other animals constitutes some evidence that they can have the same sorts of mental states as humans. For example, the neuroanatomical structures and neurochemicals implicated in human pain behavior are commonly found in vertebrate species. It must be noted, however, that it is impossible for similar mental states to be achieved by a variety of different neurological structures in different animals. Therefore, the absence of, say, nerve fibers of an identical type to those responsible for transmitting pain sensations in humans does not completely exclude the possibility of an animal experiencing pain.
Here are some important concepts that is worth considering when we are talking about the animal ethics. The first one is the anthropomorphism, which is actually another way to use in discussing the welfare of our animals. Why? It is because anthropomorphism is a term that we can use when we are talking about animals as if they have human characteristics. The next concept is the speciesism. So dito na pumapasok yung isang argument kanina na sinasabing Homo sapiens lang daw ang may karapatang magkaroon ng intrinsic value. It only means to say that their arguments is one form of discriminating animals. According kasi sa Oxford Dictionary, speciesism was defined as the discrimination against or exploitation of certain animal species by human beings.
Equal consideration of interest demands equal treatment where interests are the same. Equal consideration of interest is closely related to the concept of speciesism. Treating animals of all species equally may seem to be wrong-headed. For different species have different needs. A cat may require litter trays, but it makes no sense to give this to a goldfish. Same as the freedom to practice religion, which is a very important thing to many humans. It doesn't make sense to give this to a cow. However, concept of equal consideration of interest allows different treatment of different animals. We must give equal weight to their morally relevant similar interests in our own ethical decision making. Thus, if it hurts to a goat as much as it hurts to a human to be slapped, we ought to avoid causing this sort of pain for both goats and humans. This principle considers an equal treatment of animals and humans, justified only if there is a morally relevant differences between humans and that animal. It does not necessarily imply that all animals lives the same as human lives, nor does the value of their lives. But it's also not consistent with the idea that all humans have higher moral status than all other species. Peter Singer, or Peter Albert David Singer, is an Australian moral philosopher whose idea of utilitarianism aims to maximize the satisfaction of preferences of all species. He considers the value of consequences beyond just pleasure and pain. This argues that we should maximize the satisfaction of preferences. If animals have preferences, then they should be included in our calculation. This is the form used by Peter Singer in his book, Animal Liberation. Following on him from his idea of equal consideration of interest, the kind of creature, human, goat, cat, dog, and etc., having these preferences does not affect their moral importance. All is equal. In his idea of utilitarianism, he emphasizes the major animal interest, minor human. His theory resulted in some radical conclusion, like the abandonment of most form of farming and animal research. This is because he sees the suffering as the results from these practices as unjustified by the benefits. In particular, he is offended by the sacrifice of major animal interests. For example, the suffering of ducks and geese force-fed to produce pâté de foie gras in order to provide human minor interests, which in this example is the pleasure of the palate. However, utilitarian theories do allow more pragmatic approach by sidelining principles in favor of outcome which may be a little better than a little worse for the animals involved. So instead of taking principle approach against, we say, animal exploitation, a utilitarian may inculcate that there would be more happiness in the world if there is more outdoor farmed pigs in the world than a factory farmed pig. Even if the outdoor pig's life is less than perfect, it still lands up on a dinner plate. It means that we are giving the preferences needed by the animal. Rather than just taking the benefits we must harness from their sacrifices. Duty-based ethics or deontology. Duty-based ethical systems are sometimes called deontological, from the Greek word deontos, meaning obligation. It emphasizes on the principle guiding behavior rather than the outcomes. These theories hold that there are some obligation which is right in themselves rather than the future consequences. It says that, for example, treat people as ends, not as a means to other ends. Theories state that we should treat other humans as ends, rather than means. So we should not use our fellow human ways which do not respect their inherent worth, even if it yields good result. Tom Regan was an American philosopher who specializes in animal rights theory. Animal rights are another form of deontological ethical theory. Tom Regan argues that animals have inherent value, for they are a subject of life. That is, they are more than just alive and conscious. They have beliefs, desire, memory, emotional life, and various other mental capabilities, which give their lives welfare. He argues that it gives them inherent worth from which flows their right. Most fundamental right is their right to respect of their inherent worth. This right sets rigid rule which forbids the use of animal resources for humans. These rules hold no matter what the consequences. In his version of animal rights, he demands the abolition of animal farming and experimentation. Approaches to animal ethics. Hybrid views. Sometimes, different ethical theories conflict with one another. This might be overcome by not subscribing completely to just one view, but rather by picking components from each. In practice, this is what many people do in their ethical thought. Oftentimes, people combine parts from different theories. For example, one may combine utilitarian theory with the rights-based approach. Bernard Rollin, also an American philosopher, in his book An Introduction to Veterinary Medical Ethics, calls for hybrid views of utilitarian and deontological ethics for animals. This view would allow the continuation of farming where ancient contract of mutual advantage between stock person and stock is maintained. Approaches to animal ethics. An ethical matrix. One approach to try and evaluate ethical problem in animal is an ethical matrix. In the matrix, different ethical theories are represented by column and the different parties to the ethical problem in row. The intersection of each column and row then represent a different dimension of the ethical problem. As many columns and rows can be added as ethical theories, principle, or parties to the problem are identified. The matrix may not be able to find a solution to the problem, but it helps us to explore all its different aspects. In the ethical matrix given, we can identify three ethical theory or principles such as utilitarianism, autonomy, and fairness or justice. And we could also identify three different parties related to the problem, such as animal, consumer, and producer. The example given on the slide consider the use of cattle growth hormones BST, or bovine somatotrophin, to stimulate more milk production in dairy cows. Under the utilitarianism, the welfare of the cow can be considered. It might be noted that BST causes more mastitis in cows. Mastitis is a condition where the breast becomes swollen, red, and inflamed. From the consumer's point of view, availability of safe food should always be considered. Any effects of the milk from BST-treated milk should be identified, as well as the effect on the price and supply of milk. What effect will the BST have on the farmer? Will their income increase? And what about their working conditions? Does the use of BST threaten the farmer's health in any way? And would they be better off if they didn't use it? Under the autonomy, we could consider the behavioral freedom of the cow. We should question if does the cow inhibit any negative behavior after the use of BST. But based on the matrix, it could be that it is not affected. Given all the benefits and risks identified by the preceding rows, under fairness or justice, we can attempt to see if they are borne equally amongst the parties. For universally affordable food are all the risks, example the cow welfare, borne by the animal, and all the benefits by the farmer, economically, can be an excuse or a justifiable action to consider the use of BST. Similarly, We can ask whether all consumers and farmers are affected similarly, or do they bear unfair cost? This example demonstrates that although matrix does not solve our problem, it can be used to raise questions about many aspects of the problem, and then fuller consideration can be given.